Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Friday Ramblings. I am your host, the Bardic One. It's Friday, it's time to ramble, that's why you're watching this video. Woo! As you may have guessed from the title, we are dipping back into the Dragon Quest goodness because it is Dragon Quest goodness this entire year. It is the 35th anniversary of the Dragon Quest franchise's humble beginnings. So we are going to continue to break down your history of all things Dragon Quest so that you can start the next 35 years excited to play the many, many games. We have covered the spin-offs, both one-shots and spin-off franchises. Now we are going to the core series. And we're going to do it a few games at a time because one of the things the Dragon Quest series did was that it would have storyline or thematic continuity between a few different games at a time in their main series. So we're going to cover them by this subgrouping. See, I'm just going to take it into small little piles instead of the big old pile here. Teeny little pile instead of big old pile. Why? Well, because there's 11 games in the core series. Although honestly, we're probably going to skip over 10. Because, real quick spoilers, 10 is an MMO. It was never released for American play. I do not speak Japanese or read Japanese, so I did not invest in it. And frankly, I personally do not have much use for MMOs. I have tried to get into MMOs over the years. That is certainly a discussion that will no doubt take place at some point on this channel. But the basics of it is I don't play MMOs. So we're just going to, we'll acknowledge 10. Ooh, make sure I look good for my camera. But yes, we will acknowledge 10. Otherwise, we will gloss over it. But that is still 10 games to give good, whet your appetite summaries for, and that's a lot. As such, we're breaking this up into 3, maybe 4 parts. I don't know. I'm going to have to see as we go along. But definitely, you're watching the first part today, and that is covering the first 3 games, known here in America usually as the Erdrick Trilogy. Although, because that was not the direct translation of his name in Japan, it's also referred to as the Loto Trilogy, which would be a more direct translation of that key character's name. Either way, you're referring to the first 3 games in the series. First 3 games all came out originally on the Nintendo Entertainment System, although they have had remakes and ports and whatnot across various other systems. So the good news is it's not hard to track down a version of the game. And we'll get into those individual ones as we go along. Just quick. Consult my notes here. Make sure I'm looking at the right notes. Now, in the original release of the first 3 games, they did not have subtitles. However, most of the versions you're going to be able to find nowadays, at least without paying an arm and a leg on eBay for copies of the original NES cartridges, not to mention a working NES deck, are going to have subtitles, so we are going to mention those in passing just to make sure everybody's keeping pace with what they would be looking up after the video compared to what I'm talking about. But yes, For the full trivia disclosure, the subtitles were not used in the original releases of the games, which is all good fun. So, the original game in the series is Dragon Quest 1, or, again, depending on which version of it you're playing, Dragon Warrior 1. We've gone over the copyright thing a couple times, but the real quick base summary is that the series was always called Dragon Quest in Japan. However, before it could be imported over to America, right over here, suppose over there, or started, a tabletop role-playing game had trademarked the term Dragon Quest, and so the lovely company Nintendo of America was unable to refer to their games as Dragon Quest, instead going for the term Dragon Warrior. Nowadays, everything is referred to as Dragon Quest because the board game ceased production for so long that the copyright / trademark, there is a subtle difference between the two. I believe it's trademark in this case. If it is, then I apologize for saying copyright initially, but either way, the legal rights to the name did expire, and Square Enix gobbled them up, so the game could be the same name in all countries, which is a good thing. So, we have the original Dragon Quest. Good, just straight up Dragon Quest. Even on the remakes, there is no subtitles for it. It was developed by Enix and originally debuted in Japan in 1986, showing up in America in 1989. Now, as such, coming out in 1986, it was one of the earliest titles for the NES, and, you know, I'm going to be honest here, it does not fully utilize what the hardware was capable of. Now, what does that mean? Well, for starters, you only have one playable character in your party, period, throughout the whole game. You are a lone hero of destiny striking out against the evil that is threatening the world. Now, you do learn magic, and you can wield some pretty effective, solid weapons, so your hero character is kind of a hybrid of your classic role-playing classes. This would set a precedent that would continue throughout every Dragon Quest game following, where the hero character, maybe, depending on the game and how they handle character versus class system, may tweak up the hero, and you may have more fine control over what skills they develop, but at the core, all Dragon Quest heroes are noted compared to other good alignment people in their worlds as being a generally well-balanced jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style character. Also tends to have pretty reliable stat growth so that they stay pretty competitive with the other characters. So in the later games, when you do have a full party of specialists, the hero is still pretty kick-ass and earning his top billing spotlight. However, as I said, in the original game, it is the lone hero. So what's the story of the game? Well, in a far-off kingdom, originally referred to as King Tegel, although again, your translations may vary, sometimes called Alefgard, there was legends of a hero named Erdrick, or again, Lodo, depending on your translation, who generations ago had saved the kingdom from a great evil. Unfortunately, evil returned, kidnapped the princess, kidnapped the most powerful and sacred magical artifact, the Ball of Light, from Untitled Castle, and took all that was safe and peaceful about the kingdom, throwing it into chaos. Monsters swarmed all over the kingdom. Everywhere you went. People couldn't travel from village to village anymore. Mass hysteria! And no Erdrick around, because it's been generations. Lo and behold, a plucky young warrior shows up, declares himself to be this descendant of Erdrick, and wishes to follow in his ancestors' footsteps, returning peace to the kingdom once again. Simple plot, very classic, works very much for a simple game. So the basics of the game is that you journey across all that you can reach, which is basically one giant landmass. In this game, because it was very early on, and as I said, they had not fully utilized the hardware since people were still learning what the hardware was capable of, there were no boats or flying vehicles, so you are exploring one giant land mass. Although some of it is only connected by bridges, so, technically you might pedantically argue it's a couple different land masses, but you are not required to hit the ocean waves to land anywhere else or fly anywhere remote. But, as I said, you go across your giant landmass, making yourself stronger by battling various monsters, upgrading your equipment many times over, and more importantly, gathering the items needed to storm the evil Dragon Lord's Castle Sharlock, and defeat him, retrieve the Ball of Light, and prove you are just as awesome as the legendary hero of yore. So, let's break into some of the amusing aspects of this. Now, I mentioned earlier the princess got kidnapped. Roughly about the halfway point in the game, you have the option of rescuing the princess. Note, I said option. Technically, because the only requirement to achieve victory in the game is to get to the Dragon Lord and defeat him, rescuing the princess is 100% optional. Now, the game highly encourages you to do so, basically telling you several times that if you want to be a true hero, you need to rescue the princess. And the canonical ending that sets up the sequels assumes you rescue the princess. Now, I owned the original NES cartridge. Sadly, I do no longer have my physical copy. My NES collection has not survived the decades. It's sad but true. Still, every time I did play the game, I did make a point of rescuing the princess because, hey, I want to feel heroic. That, and she does do you a slight favor after her rescue, giving you a hint as to where one of the items is in the game that makes collecting the necessary items to get into Sharlock Castle easier. So, plot-wise, as I said, I'm not giving a super lot of spoilers here, mostly because if you play the sequels, you're going to get this information anyway. If you defeat the Dragon Lords, you return to Untitled Castle and are given the princess's hand in marriage. Two of you declining to inherit the kingdom from the current king, you go off across the seas to establish your own kingdom. Now, this whole idea of marrying the princess happily ever after established one of the internet's earliest memes when the game, and it did this a couple times in the game, has the princess ask you the question, "Dost thou love me?" And you are given a yes-no option. However, it's not a real option. If you choose no, she says, "But thou must," and asks you the question again. Theoretically, if you have enough time to kill, you can keep hitting no and run through this conversation loop until your thumbs bleed. This is the original internet meme. Dost thou love me? But thou must. Dost thou love me? But thou must. Kind of creepy if you think about it the wrong way. But as I said, the canonical ending is that you do love her, you do take her hand in marriage, the two of you go across the seas to establish your own kingdom, after returning peace to where you are, and everybody celebrates you as a true hero just as good as your ancestor Erdrick. / Loto. This is all well and good. So, what's the downside of the game? Well, very simple. The original version, to a lesser extent the sequels, but it is because they did tweak some of the data points here, or not sequels, but ports, in the ports and remakes. The game is a serious grind fest. Now in the modern days of MMOs and skill trees where, and again this is one of my issues with MMOs, it's 90% grinding anyway. Modern players probably aren't going to balk so much at this, especially because most modern players are no doubt playing one of the remakes in which the experience and gold gaining and requirements for equipment was tweaked to make it slightly less grindy. Still, it is a game where if you play the NES original, there are large chunks of playable hours in which you will be wandering around the nearest village that you can safely get to, waiting for randomly generated fights, because you ain't going anywhere till you gain 2 or 3 more levels, and depending on what point in the game you're at, gaining 2 or 3 more levels can take a couple straight hours of gameplay. And again, that's not even counting the gold grinding to keep upgrading your equipment. Sometimes the gold grinding can be worse than the experience grinding, depending on which equipment you're getting. Now, the good news is the ultimate equipment in the game is storyline achieved. You gain the armor and sword of Erdrick. Now, in a weird kind of point that I've never gotten 100% verified, it's one of those things that's puzzled the Dragon Quest community for a while. You do have shields as an equipment in the game. However, the best shield in the game is not Erdrick's shield. It's one that you buy. However, all the official art of the shield does show the same logo on it that Erdrick's armor and sword demonstrate, implying that it is Erdrick's shield. But it's not, because it's freely available in potentially mass quantity because you buy it from a store. Was it something where they did the art and in the original script it was supposed to be a one-off shield to go along with the other 2 pieces of equipment, and then they kind of tweaked stuff and didn't change the official art in the book, in the instruction manual? I don't know. I've never gotten a definitive answer on it, but it's a thing that happens. Still, this is something that's important to note for the future. And the future was Dragon Quest II, which came out in Japan in 1987, only 1 year later. And in the US, 1990, again, 1 year later. What's the big deal about this? Well, very simple. It proves that, at least in Japan, Dragon Quest was a huge hit. It got strong sales almost immediately and inspired Enix to get a sequel out the door. Now in America, the sales were fair, but nowhere near as gangbusters as it was in Japan. This has been something that has plagued the Dragon Quest series for many years, really throughout its history, despite the fact that it is heavily influenced by the Western world's classic fantasy genre settings with swords and sorceries, kings and European-style castles. It's never done well in the Western world, at least not nearly as big as it has in Japan. I don't know what to tell you. Still, a sequel was commissioned very quickly, in which it has been 100 years since your great hero and the Princess Gwaelin set out across the seas to unknown lands. Gwaelin and her hero built the land of Torland. In time, she bore 3 children. The eldest prince was given the land of Middenhall, to the youngest prince the land of Kennock, and to the princess the kingdom of Moonbrook. However, after 100 years, evil rose again, and the peace that the people of Torland enjoyed came to an end. This time, evil took the shape of Hargon the Sorcerer, whose war on the world started with Moonbrook Castle. Wiping the castle down to little bits of debris, the descendants of Erdrick panicked. Still, after a bit of miscommunication, the 2 princes unite, and discovering that the Princess of Moonbrook had in fact survived, these few generations removed from the hero, who was few generations removed from the legendary hero Erdrick, set out to destroy Hargon and bring peace to the massively expanded world that is Torland compared to the original Alefgard. So right away, you're already sensing the biggest improvement in the game. We go from 1 character to 3. Now, it is still a story-driven choice. Your 3 characters will always be the same 3 characters. They'll always have the same stats, but we are getting specialization. The princess tends to fit more of the classic clerical class, whereas the prince of... make sure I get this straight. The Prince of Kennock fits more of your classic Wizard Knight class, where the Prince of Middenhall is your go-to hero, who is a little bit of everything. Good news is that the grinding is less noticeable in this game, and that with the massively expanded world, there's a lot less backtracking over the same geography over and over again. The game introduces more spells, and with 3 different party members, the idea that certain people only equip certain kind of equipment, depending on what kind of hero they are. A tradition that would continue throughout all Dragon Quest games. Now, here's the quick version of it. Well, if you enjoy anything about Dragon Quest 1, you will love Dragon Quest 2. Now, as I said, the modern remakes do have subtitling kicking in. Dragon Quest 2 is usually now referred to as Luminaries of the Legendary Line. So, if you see a game referenced as Dragon Quest Luminaries of the Legendary Line, it is referring to the second game. Now, I did not own this game. The only Dragon Quest game I owned as a child was the original. However, I did later on gain the ability to play the original NES version. I did beat it. I did thoroughly enjoy it. Later on in life, I bought the Game Boy Color remakes that bundled the first 2 games into 1 physical cartridge. Sadly, over the course of moving a couple times, that game has been lost to me. Sad times. But it is one option available if you do have a working Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance, which will play Game Boy Color games. But, as I said, depending on if you find it online, at a secondhand store, how much you may have to pay to get a copy of the Game Boy Color remakes will vary. Your best bet is most likely getting one of the digital downloads available on the current Nintendo Switch for these early games. Which also applies to the third one, but I'm going to throw that out there right now. Still, Dragon Quest II, in a lot of ways, is the first game of what most modern people that get into the series later on would recognize as Dragon Quest, because you do have the multiple characters making up a party of heroes. You have the specialization aspects of the different heroes, and you have the much more in-depth stories to it, including the idea of having to fight against evil and gather your party. Good stuff. RPG classics that weren't really cliche at the time this game was made yet. This was one of those games that helped establish these cliches. So, I would definitely recommend Dragon Quest II. Dragon Quest I, if you don't mind the grinding and you like a simpler story where it's not going to hold your hand and tell you what to do every single step of the way, yes, go for one. Or, as I said, if you can track down the Game Boy Color cartridge bundle and you have hardware that will play it and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, go for that version. There were some tweaks in both games that streamline them a bit, and it is good times. So, this leads us to Dragon Quest III, now generally referred to with the subtitle of The Seeds of Salvation. And Dragon Quest III did come out in 1988 in Japan, so again, we are getting only 1 year, so a pretty rapid release. However, it didn't come out in America until 1992, so we had a 2-year wait. Still not bad, all things considered. So, what's a quick rundown of Dragon Quest III? Once upon a time, there was a man called Ortega, who had a loving wife and child, and lived in the castle of Alihan. He had a tendency to venture near and far, fighting monsters and evil, building a legend for himself as a great hero. One day while fighting a dragon, Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior, dragons keep popping up in the games as major opponents. Thematic. We like that word. Ortega was able to slay the dragon, but the monster took the hero down with him into the deep hole of the volcano. Years later, as people feared that evil would conquer the land without Ortega to keep it at bay, Ortega's son turned 16 and decided it was time for him to follow in his father's footsteps and potentially verify exactly what happened to his father. I mean, yeah, the dragon dragged him into a volcano, but, it's the fantasy genre. We dip back to the old Marvel Comics rule. If you didn't see a body, don't assume there's a death. Now this is where things take a twist. Now again, like 2, I did eventually play Dragon Quest III's original NES version a few times, because it is a very fun game. And I did have the Game Boy Color remake, which for 3 was its own cartridge as a standalone remake. So, both versions are excellent to play, but here is the biggest major change. 3 was the first game to bring in the idea of distinct classes. Ortega's son, aka the hero, with the big H, is the only required character. At the beginning of the game, you will be encouraged to, although it is technically optional. There are people online that have done solo character runs, but it is super challenging. I do not recommend it until you beat this game a couple times and get a feel for it. But you are highly encouraged to take the option of recruiting various heroes for hire. All apologies to Marvel and their various trademarks on the term heroes for hire. What we would classically in the real world call a mercenary. All moral implications set aside. Now, because they are chosen by the player as part of a way of customizing the game and not storyline driven, this allows you to have some fun. You can name the characters what you want, you can pick the gender, and you can decide how many of what classes to recruit to total out the hero and 3 buddies. You have the soldier, who is your classic sword-swinging knight. The pilgrim, who is kind of a magic fighter in between. The wizard, who is your classic spellcaster as you expect. The fighter, also known in some translations as the martial artist. Unarmed, so they don't hit quite as hard as the soldier, but has the added benefit of highly increased attack speed, which means, well developed, a fighter can basically guarantee to hit first in any combat round. Very useful against bosses. The merchant, whose main point is that they can find extra gold at the end of battles. However, outside of that, they're not super useful. Some people put them in basically as a way of slightly tweaking the difficulty level of the game. But it also allows you to gain gold quicker. So that little bit of gold grinding in the game does become almost unheard of. You also have the goof off, known in later games as the Jester or the show off. Basically an entertainer, what in some fantasy worlds would be called a bard. The goof off starts off basically useless, but has the main advantage of being the only character that can naturally change classes into the Sage, who is the ultimate super spellcasting wizard class. Kind of like the joke in Pokemon Gen 1, where the most useless Pokemon, Magikarp, evolves into Gyarados, who's like one of the best stat monsters in the game. Same idea. Now, the other characters can change classes once reaching the Shrine of Dharma, which means that you can technically have somebody who's built up the high HP and speed of a fighter reclass into a wizard to learn spells, so you can have a spellcaster who is more likely to hit first, which can be useful when you're throwing out healing spells. Generally, I did not reclass too much when I played the games. I would maybe take my starting wizard, and after gaining the Scroll of Sage item, reclass them into a Sage, because they were already spellcaster, might as well be the best spellcaster. Depending on translation, it may be known as the Book of Satori. But it is a way to change one of the other characters into a Sage if you so wish. My run, I went with the fighter, because as I said, that ability to hit first almost every single time was a major advantage, and when they get their late game equipment, can go head to head with the soldier in terms of hitting power. The wizard, who as I said, I would usually reclass into a Sage for the extra spells, and then after that, usually the pilgrim, because that's another balanced character. Learns healing spells early on that the wizard doesn't. So it's good to have both of them in the party. That was my run through. So, you're wondering, who's this Ortega person? What does this have to do with the first two games? I thought you said this was all storyline related. It is. I am going to give you a plot spoiler here, so I don't usually do this on channel. I understand. If you don't want the plot spoilers, even though this is a 29-year-old game, go ahead, skip ahead a minute or two in the video, or just stop it here, whichever you prefer. Mute the video. Either way, warning, blatant plot spoiler ahead. Son of Ortega eventually finds out that his father did not in fact perish when he fell into the volcano, but actually fell into another land where the evil that is plaguing your hometown originated from. And upon you and your party defeating this new king of evil once and for all, I feel bad, I really should have thrown this name out here. I'm so bad. Bad note playing. Bad note taking. Baramos and his master Zoma. Okay, sorry. But upon defeating Baramos and his master Zoma, your custom-named hero is given a title that translates to legendary hero in the modern tongue, but in the ancient tongue that this title is descended from is pronounced Erdrick. That's right, folks. Dragon Quest III, despite being the third game released in the series, is the prequel to Dragon Quest I and II. It is the story of Erdrick and how he became a hero of legend to begin with, because the second world he descends into is the realm that would one day become Alefgard. Woo! That's how you do a swerve, folks. Now, this also does two major things to the general story of the Erdrick family trilogy. One, it fills in the gaps of exactly what Erdrick did to become such a legendary hero. He basically brought peace to the kingdom for the first time in existence, so it could become the Kingdom of Alefgard that we all know and loved from the first game, that would later create the descendants that would generate the land of Torland from the second game, but established that this was not the first hero of his bloodline, that Ortega and possibly some of Ortega's ancestors are cementing the line of Erdrick as a line of great heroes. Whenever evil arises, somebody in their generation will, or somebody in their bloodline that is part of the living generation, which is how I meant to say that sentence the first time, will rise up. Now, since this is the only family in the Dragon Quest lore that has 4 confirmed generations of great heroes, this makes it the penultimate hero line in the technically 11 game, although I really don't like counting the MMO, Dragon Quest meta lore, and proves that no matter how many sequels came about and how many people may love the characters in the later sequels, the family of Erdrick is the core of all things that became Dragon Quest. Alright, plus spoilers over. The main deal about class characters being introduced in the series is that later games, such as Dragon Quest VI, would go back to the idea of having class and class abilities and skills and specializations different from the characters themselves, allowing customization, which increases replay value. But all of those classes were the classes seen in 3. Now, 6 added a few more classes, which we'll get into in the later video when we discuss 6 in more detail. But those core classes and even the later classes all can be traced back very easily to this handful of classes in Dragon Quest III, which created its permanent imprint on the Dragon Quest gameplay mechanics. Plus, we expanded our party from 3 to 4, which, even though later games would have more storyline-based characters that could be quickly swapped in and out as you go throughout the game, 4 has remained the active playable party number ever since. So that's the second major impact 3 does for you. Frankly, out of the Erdrick Trilogy, 3 is my favorite, hands down. I like the customization, I like the story, I like the amount of content. I like basically everything about the game. Now, because it is a prequel, that good news means you can play 3 first, although if you have never played any of the original games, I do recommend you do them in publishing order so that you can fully appreciate how the games have grown and evolved as you go through. You know, if you play 3 first and then go to 1, frankly, 1's going to seem kind of like a disappointment because, as I said, it was more of a prototype game than a full-blown Dragon Quest game, as a lot of people who've looked at the modern games would think of it. It is not a bad game by any means, but it is a very basic game. It is the foundation that the franchise was built on. Not even the ground floor. It's the foundation. It's what the ground floor sits on. This is the ground floor. That would be like Dragon Quest II. This is the foundation. This is what keeps the ground floor from touching all the nasty dirt. It's like the basement support beams. That's what 1 is. It's very important to have. Essential to have. Should be respected. But it's not very pretty. Still, as I have often said, the worst Dragon Quest game is a lot better than 90% of the shovelware that a lot of companies have put out. And especially the remakes, because they did tweak your experience and gold requirements, makes the bitter pills that can pop up in Dragon Quest I a little easier to swallow. So, mobile devices, Nintendo Switch, older hardware that you have that still works. Hey, my Game Boy Advance still works. I've shown it off in a previous video. However, you can grab your hands on a copy of these classic games. I recommend you play them. They are worth it. They are fun. And, best of all, as we discussed earlier in the Dragon Quest Monsters breakdown video, this is where a lot of the creatures you see in those games originated from, and the character art on the monsters is freaking brilliant. Except for, you know, visually improving with the advancement in graphical quality from game to game, the designs have never changed, because the creatures that were in Dragon Quest I were designed so beautifully the first go round they really didn't need tweaking. God bless you, Akira Toriyama. You do great work visually. So, we went slightly long for rambling, but hey, it's 3 big games to talk about. Had a little bit of a long intro. That's okay. We're going to call it here, folks. We are going to cover the other games in the core series in later months. Not in the next week or two, because this is the last video of September, which means we're hitting up October, and since it is the 3rd October for Roulette Productions, it is the 3rd annual Halloween-themed ramblings. That's right, we've got 5 Fridays in October, so that means 5 videos that touch on horror, supernatural awesomeness. So, check it out. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be spooky. And come November, we'll go back to your regularly scheduled programming. And we may even discuss some more Dragon Quest. After all, we've got 6 more games to cover. No. 7 more games to cover. And there's only 2 months left in the year. November and December. What are we going to do? It's the 35th anniversary celebration. We'll have to ramble some more about Dragon Quest. It'll be such a noble sacrifice for me. Just kidding, I love these games. And I appreciate all of you that watch, and all of you that will watch our special Halloween themed stuff in October, and all of you that will come back in November and December for those future videos. Until then, I will see you every Friday, and remember, you can ramble, but don't hate. Bye-bye.